Welcome to another episode of Thought Crimes, the podcast where no topics are off limits. If you or I or Jason were able to learn even one thing today, then I think we've accomplished our mission. So, before we begin, Jason, what is your problem?
What is my problem?
I'm just kidding. What's new with you, man?
Man, my problem is the same as what's new.
There you go.
I'm finally getting back to the gym a little bit better after all the lockdowns and everything. I was able to carve out the good routine like I was in pre-lockdown. But my problem today was I didn't manage to go. I had to stay at work a little bit late, and then there just wasn't enough time in the day to get set up between coming home from work, getting set up for this. So, a little bit of a positive, a little bit of a negative. We'll make up for it tomorrow.
And how was the gain loss since the lockdowns?
Well, you and me are both ectomorphs, so you'll understand this one. I'm probably about 10 pounds down right now from where I was at my height about a year ago. It's going to take a good while to come back, but at least when you've already built up the strength and you've already built up the size, it's a lot easier to go get it again than building it from scratch.
Yeah. I was the same though when COVID first hit and they really closed everything down, even the park. So I couldn't even do monkey bar workouts and stuff. I lost 10 pounds too. And I was pretty much at my heaviest. That's not saying a lot for Jason and I, but anyways.
No, we're both long and lean kind of guys. And if the wind blows a little too hard there, we might take off.
Yeah. Did you ever watch Hacksaw Ridge?
I have not.
World War II movie. It's good with Andrew Garfield. Anyways, Vince Vaughn is his drill sergeant, and he's built, I'd say very close to like me. He's a pretty slim, but like in shape, but slim and light, tall guy. And his drill sergeant Vince Vaughn decides to call him. I think it's what is it, cornstalk or something? And he's like, stay away from strong winds, son.
Yeah, that's pretty applicable. So how about you, man? What's new?
Same old. The cool kind of thing that my wife and I have started doing, I was telling you about it, so I figured I'd share with the gang here. We've started reading to each other while we do things. So, when she comes back from work and we decide to make supper, then one of us will make supper, the other one will read out loud. So we finished reading the entire book called The Parasitic Mind. So that's written by Gad Saad from Concordia University, a guy that you and I both follow and like quite a bit. It was a great book. And now we're on to a Thomas Sowell book. Actually, the same one I got you for Christmas called Economic Facts and Fallacies, which is, I bought it for you and I was super intrigued. And then my wife got intrigued by a bit more by Sowell. So I was like, all right, well, I'll order a few of his books. So got that one. And the other one said discrimination and discrepancies, something like that.
Basic economics?
No, it's called Discrimination and Disparities. That's what it is. But the first one we're reading, is Economic Facts and Fallacies.
Cool. Yeah, when you were first telling me about that, I didn't quite understand. It's just like from a mechanical standpoint, how it would work. Like, let's say you're making dinner, she's reading, or she's tidying up, you're reading, sort of thing. Or like, I would almost be tired of like listening to myself read out loud to someone else, or I would feel like I'd be encroaching in their space a little bit. Does it ever feel like that? Are you able to pay attention? How's the logistics work?
Yeah, it's pretty good. So we have kind of like it's not a huge house, like especially the family space. So it's kind of open kitchen, dining room, and living room all in the same place. So I can even sit on the couch on a Sunday afternoon if she wants to bake or do something, and I'll read out loud. But if not, she'll just sit at the dining room table and I can make supper, something like that. I kind of like reading out loud, and she does too. Actually, she says she understands more if she's the one reading, so which makes sense if you're more visual.
Cool. Yeah, I think I read something not too long ago too, where if you watch something, you'll retain something like 5 or 10%. If you read it, you'll retain 20%. If you teach it to someone else, you'll retain 90%, all the way at the other end. But if you both read and speak it out loud, kind of like let's say you're studying for an exam, you just read it out loud to yourself, you'll retain something like 40 or 50% of the information.
Right. Yeah, you can only remember so much stuff, but that's kind of what's great too with reading out loud is you can pause and, I always interject with other, fun facts or comments that I have. So, yeah, it's a cool way to read a book. It sounds silly, but bring it back to kind of what we did in kindergarten.
Yeah. Well, it's a
Yeah.
nice activity for the two of you too, right?
Yeah, and we've decided we're better with nonfiction books because I mean that's pretty much what I read. She reads more fiction, but the thing is, you can't jump into fiction as easily, right? Whereas if it's nonfiction, you can read a chapter or even a couple paragraphs, and it works. But some fiction is I started reading Outlander to her while she was in the middle of it, but she became obsessed with reading the book, so she didn't wait for me anyways.
I find fiction is more personal. Like, let's say you've never seen the Lord of the Rings movies and you're going to read Lord of the Rings. Well, you'll have an idea what each character looks like. You'll have an idea of the world. And I find if someone else would be telling me the story without the visual of the movie, it it wouldn't be my idea anymore. It'd be someone else's idea putting that idea onto me.
Totally. It's kind of like when big fans of a book then see it being realized on screen and then they freak out because they're like, that's shit. It's not what I imagined. And you're like, yeah, well, everybody imagines something different, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
So
So, yeah, what's on the docket today, Jason?
we're going to cover the Overton window. It's something that I think everyone kind of intuitively knows. Maybe you just never put the words to it. And it's something that you, me, and our close friends we discuss tangentially, actually pretty frequently, really. And it's getting more and more important today with just the discourse we're having as a society. And it's something that I felt was important to cover. You're very knowledgeable in, and you come at this with a more of a free speech, analytical perspective. And yeah, I'm looking forward to opening this one up.
Yeah, it's a concept that I think it's funny. I guess we take for granted that everybody has heard the concept before, but there's quite a few folks and even family members that I've talked to who've never heard of the Overton window. They have no idea what it is. So either way, it could be kind of a Overton window 101, but also, yeah, a discussion, a bit more of an open discussion on free speech and the shift of censoring and accepting certain ideas and speech.
So, how about I start by just kind of defining it broadly, and then you can go a little bit deeper into some of the nuances.
Sounds good.
So, what the Overton window is, it's a model for understanding what speech can be discussed in public society. So, it's essentially the breadth of ideas that you can discuss freely and they'll be accepted. If you're a politician, this is really important, and we'll get into the degrees of the Overton window later. But essentially, the thing that is the most popular within society will become policy, and everything a little bit more radical from that will be less and less tolerated within political discourse. And it's not so much a left, right, liberal, conservative thing as it is a more free to less free. So you can think of it more as a vertical axis onto the left, right political axis. So it's something that can shrink. It's something that can expand, and it can. You could have multiple Overton windows, and you'll have one for every single major topic. So you might have one on drug use and drug control. You might have one for free speech. You might have one for ideology. You might have one for education. Really, any single debatable issue, there'll be an Overton window, and whatever is allowed to be said and whatever is most popular will be within that Overton window, and things that have really no place or are not accepted in the current framework of that society will be outside of the Overton window.
Just something Jason forgot to mention is just the reason why it's called the Overton window is because it was coined by an American policy analyst named Joseph P. Overton. So he was a senior VP at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. So just a little FYI as to why it's actually called the Overton window. Now, Jason mentioned it's more of like a freedom versus no freedom. Totally agree. However, I would say that it can also shift on a left to right axis without necessarily growing, right? You could keep kind of the same size of acceptable speech or box that is the Overton window and slightly shift it left or slightly shift it right. But a few examples where the Overton window can grow and or shift. A few positive examples too. For instance, it's kind of necessary for the Overton window to grow if there are scientific or technological discoveries. Then your vocabulary changes. Your the concept of certain things you believed in might change. Therefore, several big concepts and ideas may change, and then it becomes quite important for the Overton window to make those things at least acceptable to talk about.
Right. So, if you want to give a quick example on that one, I believe it was Galileo who postulated that the Earth revolved around the sun. And correct me if I'm wrong here, someone else in the audience might know better than me, it just offhand like that, but I think that was in the 1600s, maybe the 1500s. But without getting bogged down in the dates, before that, stating that the Earth revolved around the sun definitely would not have been popular opinion. It most likely would have been radical. Some people never even would have thought of that, making it unthinkable, completely outside the Overton window. But you definitely wouldn't have based policy or scientific practice based on that idea up until Galileo's proving of that idea.
But yeah, no, that's a good example. And he was, I believe, he was persecuted too. I think he was on house arrest for a long time.
I think he died in prison.
Yeah,
I think. And again, don't quote me on that one, but just seems to me that's what it was.
yeah. Go check it out for yourself. Um, so, what about you? You talked about kind of more freedom versus less freedom. Can you kind of give us the degrees of public policy?
Right. And this comes from the think tank that William mentioned earlier. And without getting bogged down too much in the kind of the nitty gritty and the policy of it, but essentially your Overton window, you want it nice and wide. You want to be able to have a whole lot of expression. A wider Overton window, the better. But no matter how wide the Overton window, there's always going to be d- gradations to what's going to be to the center of it. Whatever is the most popular, like I've been alluding to, will become policy. A little bit less popular than the actual policy, whether towards the more restrictive or the less restrictive, will be popular opinion, but is not quite enough to become policy yet. And then from there, it becomes just less and less popular. You have sensible, you have acceptable, radical, and unthinkable. And as you go, fewer and fewer people are going to espouse these viewpoints. But more importantly, fewer people will be willing to listen to those ideas. And that's really where the Overton window comes into play. It's what is the consequence of espousing certain ideas that could be radical, that could be acceptable, but still quite fringe.
Right. And why is a large Overton window good, Jason? You're saying it like it's for granted, but I don't know. In this day and age, we have quite a few folks who don't seem to like freedom, and in fact, they seem to like security and safety a lot more than they like freedom.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's the underpinning of why we're doing this here episode. Um, Pick any popular issue. It could be, well, okay, we just released an episode on taxation. Well, the Overton window on taxation could be the most popular, and then the policy is as it is. Fairly high taxes. You get your return, your tax on basically everything other than breathing, and that's what it is. Well, what if I say I think there should be no income tax? There should only be a sales tax, next to no property tax, definitely no savings tax, and no capital gains tax. Well, that is certainly a radical proposition within today's context and within today's political makeup in Canada. Um, will I be thrown into prison for having that opinion? No. So the Overton window is wide enough to at least be able to say it, but it's not so wide that that is either popular or even anywhere near becoming policy. But it's
Right.
still an idea, and it's not hurting anyone. but it's an idea that could, and in my opinion, merits investigation. But the Overton window currently in Canada is too narrow to investigate that train of thought, but not so narrow that I'm now being dragged away to prison.
Right. We have another good example, kind of a tangent, but just to talk about this, essentially the struggle between freedom and security is the one with COVID, right? So COVID, it seems like many governments and many governing bodies have very much shrunken the Overton window when it comes to COVID, when it comes to talking about pandemics, healthcare, viruses, vaccination, that kind of stuff, to really try and protect a very specific narrative. And this is something that I think has surprised both of us in this day and age. That other ideas, whether good or bad, some might be more towards freedom, right, and less towards guaranteed security, which in many cases you could argue that there's no guaranteed security in the arguments they're making anyways. But that I don't think we'd ever see that day come so soon where all of these various ideas, many of which come from medical professionals that just differ from the mainstream government opinion, are now being silenced. Right? People aren't necessarily being thrown in jail, but they are trying very hard to shrink that Overton window and make it completely unthinkable at the very least.
So and I think that is the most topical and probably the most applicable example, William. So, great work on bringing that one up. Let's say that you're a politician, an up and coming politician, and say, well, your opinion on COVID is that I think that we should lock down only our senior citizen homes, since it appears by the data that the number one predicting factor of negative effects of COVID is age. But I think that also the damages from having lockdowns
Right.
far outweighs the pros of having lockdowns for any other segment of the population,
Right.
which is an opinion, just like any other opinion. It can be validated, just like any other opinion. You can find stats to validate essentially any point of view. But in this case here, the Overton window is so narrow when it comes to COVID that is a very radical statement.
Yeah. It's a little worrisome in my books. You have many doctors who've also talked about different ways to treat COVID, different drugs to use, and it seems to me that for many political reasons and political gains, those people have completely been dismissed, silenced, and in some cases more than that.
But William, you're not a doctor.
I'm not. So follow the science, guys. And isn't that a little tangent again here? Isn't that a little ironic that all the folks who say follow the science say it so much and with so little thought behind it that they're actually doing the opposite of what science is. They're actually applying it very much like a dogma, and they're not saying, what is science? Science is asking questions, isn't it? Science is then asking questions on the answers you got to the first questions and then testing those. I don't see a lot of that going on from the people who keep saying they're, science worshippers.
Exactly, and we don't pretend to think that we have all the solutions. We don't think we do, but we're just pointing out that it seems like public discourse has been very much restricted on this particular topic.
Yeah, and the whole point, bringing it back to the Overton window, is I think both you and I believe that the Overton window should, in most cases, be pretty damn wide, right, or pretty damn tall, and that's because if you take a pandemic, for example, if you take the example of COVID, the solution or the cure or whatever you think may work in the long run could be found in the outskirts of the Overton window.
Right. Just
Right?
because you framed it on a certain width and band doesn't mean that the solution is there.
Yeah. And again, just bring it back to Galileo, like you mentioned. He was absolutely at the fringes of the Overton window, if not at the outside of the Overton window. And guess what? He was pretty fucking right.
So we had an example prepared on the war on drugs, but I think we did a decent job kind of framing what the Overton window is. And Will, what do you say? Instead of taking 10 minutes on a botched history lesson, how about we move on to the next section?
Sure. Yeah. No, we were just going to use the war on drugs and same-sex marriage as two examples of again just of topics that have shifted throughout the 20th century. And if we look at we would use North America as a case study, whereas many drugs and the taking of drugs and the idea of drugs and policies around drugs have drastically changed and shifted throughout the decades. And same can be said if you look more recently, same-sex marriage. We can look at the last 30 years and look at this huge shift, right? I'd say wide opening of the Overton window when it comes to same-sex marriage and same-sex policies, like gay marriage, for instance. You had a good example is Barack Obama as senator was openly opposed to gay marriage. And I think it was his second term as president. He then made same-sex marriage legal across America federally. So they're kind of a good example of a quick shift / I guess widening of the Overton window.
Yeah, no, for sure. And same thing with the war on drugs. Like you can go from prohibition to the psychedelic era to the war on drugs to now research on psilocybin and
Right.
LSD
Microdosing.
and DMT. So you see
And
a nice widening of the Overton window with through time.
right. I mean, you have Al Capone and the prohibition all the way to today, where you have massive celebrities like Joe Rogan talking about how awesome DMT is.
Right. Exactly. And if your culture doesn't allow alcohol, chances are pretty good it doesn't allow DMT.
Yeah, yeah. All those. I guess. Yeah, you're probably right.
But it's kind of strange, right? Because we kind of take alcohol for granted in our society today. But when you think of it, like if you could only pick one and the one that would do the least amount of harm to a society between, say, weed and alcohol, probably weed is by far the least harmful one.
I would say, yeah. And I think again, it's different because one has been widely available and very, very much part of our culture for decades and decades now. Whereas weed not nearly as popular as ingested by by as many folks. But yeah, I would tend to agree, and I think that the data tends to agree with you as well by a long shot.
I want someone to fact check me on this one here, but this is like something when I fell down like a YouTube rabbit hole, like maybe like a year and a half ago. So it was kind of like why weed lost favor in our society. Essentially, it was like the paper cartel that pushed out the cannabis plant.
Is
Whereas,
this for real?
yeah, yeah. Well, again,
Okay.
fact check me on this one, right? Because hemp grows very quickly and makes a much stronger and a much more
Oh,
resilient
yes.
fiber to make paper out of. And
Yep.
supposedly, the Declaration of Independence was written on hemp paper, and it grows a lot faster, grows in similar climates, warm climates. Sure, it takes a lot of irrigation and stuff, but you can also make rope out of it. It's less labor intensive than trees and mulching it down into pulp for paper. But whatever wood tycoon or forest tycoon had his way lobbying through Congress or whatever it was, and essentially stigmatized the hemp plant because it was associated with the cannabis plant. One's the male, one's the female plant. So that's kind of how they swayed public opinion to have people turn against the hemp and marijuana plant.
Right. It's
And
kind of I
again,
watched.
fact check me on that one because that
Yeah.
comes from way back.
Yeah, no, but you are. I don't know about the whole. I hadn't heard about the whole kind of paper versus or hemp versus lumber industry, but I definitely, it was used for a lot of paper and rope. Um, that's true. Another example is I watched my wife and I watched a documentary, and now I forget what it's called, but it was like one of those food health documentaries, and it was encouraging more of like a heavy fat, more keto style diet, right? And they went through basically the whole history of the war against fat, and they're like, guys, sugar is the problem. And again, all calories are a problem in general, but yeah, no, totally. Like for years and years and years, you were like, I remember when I was a kid, and this bugs the shit out of me still to this day. I like yogurt. I like the mini goes. I like the yops. I like all yogurts. And dairy, as you know, a young boy, was a big part of my diet. I had glasses of milk all the time. That's all I had. And one day, you couldn't find normal yogurt anymore. It was zero fat yogurt everywhere, everywhere. And it's still the case. And zero fat yogurt tastes like shit. And they just replace the what makes it taste good because it's naturally fatty with aspartame or fake sugar.
Yeah. Or
So
you'd see granola bars, no fat or whatever, and then you turn it around and you look at the carbohydrate content, and for every, I don't know, say you have a 50-gram bar in your hand, well, it's 35 grams carbohydrates, and 25 of those 35 grams is just pure sugar. Well,
right,
that's no better.
right. And ironically now avocado and all sorts of nuts, like the fattiest things ever, are huge.
Man, I did keto for a little while, and
Yeah, we tried it too.
you feel good on it.
You feel good after a few days. It takes a little while to adjust.
You fine?
I thought, well, at least my digestive system.
Okay, I didn't get the runs or I didn't get cramps or anything. To me, it just, and I didn't do it for long. I did it for about a week and a half. But
Same.
but yeah, like I was feeling fine on it. I'll tell you what, my body reacts really well to, man. Just a good slab of red meat, just a nice steak, and fried vegetables, usually
Yeah,
onions, garlic, mushrooms, avocado, and some tomatoes on the side. I
yeah.
feel perfect.
Meat and greens, that's the go-to recipe for meals. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, no, we did keto too, and I saw a different. I was more cut. It's again funny enough, like all you do is eat fat, right? They tell you if you respect keto for real, like if you don't ingest carbs, yeah, eat a pound of bacon a day. Like I don't care. And again, we're fairly active too, but I was within a week, I could tell that I was more cut already.
Well, you can't function without fats.
No,
Your
they're vital.
your cell membranes are made out of fats. All of your hormones are based on cholesterol, which is essentially derivative of fats. Also, sure, they both have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. You can use them for energy, but they don't fulfill the same role. I mean, you think of your lipid profile with when you're taking your blood, your HDL, your LDL, your testosterone levels. That's all derived from fats. If you don't have them, you're not functioning.
Right. Yeah, exactly. All right. Yeah, great tangent, man.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking when you're talking about the yogurts, and we got here in the notes like the Overton window in the '90s and the 2000s. Like, oh, do I want to like swing it back right away, or do I want to let this one go?
See where it goes.
But yeah, well, let's turn it back a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, we both grew up in the '90s and the 2000s, and one shifting of the Overton window back in the day, you could say a mental hospital. You can't say that now; it's offensive or whatever. Someone's not going to be
Yeah,
happy
it's
about it.
psychiatric.
It's a psychiatric hospital. Which, okay, I mean, to me, I get it. I see where you're coming from, but there's also the devil on the shoulder in the form of George Carlin, who's just saying soft language, more syllables, soft language.
Right.
But I
Wait.
get it, right?
Yeah, I get it too. However, it is often it's a conversation and argument I have with quite a few folks, and I always just ask them. I always ask them, where's the end game, right? Because I get that you can try and destigmatize a word or a term, and sometimes it does help. Sometimes it definitely doesn't. But what happens is with time, terms of anything that you consider a touchy subject will be touchy. That's just the nature of identifying that word or that concept, right? When we were kids, it was the war against the word retard. Do you remember that?
I do.
That was big in our schools, right? And growing up in the 90s, it was like, you can't say that word anymore.
Now you have to say never go full simple Jack.
Never go simple Jack. But I've heard talks about people now saying, should we be using the word crazy, right? And at the end of the day, kids, schools, they're just going to use another word. They may use banana or butterfly, but if there's that pejorative associated with what they actually want to convey in the conversation, then that word will also become a bad word.
Right. You
Right.
can never politicize your way out of meaning. There's like humans are always going to understand things, and we're going to find ways to express it. Like there's nothing new under the sun. Like we're always going to find a way to call someone crazy, whatever word we use.
Right. Well, especially with kids, right? Like a kid is trying to express his displeasure by you saying the kid can't use poo poo head anymore. The kid's not just going to out of the blue and forevermore be nice to the kid he just called poo poo head, right? He will at some point or another want to express his displeasure for that person, whether or not it's warranted. It's kids. He'll find another word.
So, what do you think is some of the things that are influencing the Overton window today? Because we've been kind of circling around that it's moving, it's shifting, yada yada. But in your opinion, where's the Overton going? Where has it moved from? And what's some of the driving forces that's moving it right now?
First of all, culture or politics is always downstream of culture, right? So we've talked a lot about politics and policies and how at the center of the Overton window we have policy making, right? Uh, you can't have more milk toast acceptable speech than policy making. Um, However, the shift in things does happen somewhere, right? And I've mentioned in the past it could be from the scientific community, technology community. Uh, it could also come from academia. Um, it could come from Hollywood. It could come from mainstream media. It could come from 12-year-old girls who changed the words of texting, right? Like, I think, I don't know if they still are, but I know for the longest time, it was something like 12 or 13-year-old girls were the biggest language influencers in the West because of the basically texting language they had invented.
Yeah, they were on the forefront of. Well, you think when you had the flip phones, right? It took forever to.
Yeah, T9.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You had to hit like the number seven four times again, S or something. So of course you're going to find abbreviations.
Right, exactly. Uh, so all of that affects speech, concepts, and ultimately the Overton window. I'd say now, absolutely, the Overton window has moved to the left, and it has been for a while. And I would argue that academia is a huge influencer in the Overton window, and has been for forever, for a century, for sure. Um, Again, it shifts, it grows, it shrinks. It all depends on the subject matter, right? Um, we can't ignore the fact that before then there were bouts where the Overton window was more, at least from our current day perspective, was more to the right. It's pretty crazy when in the 50s and 60s, cops would come into comedy shows and arrest comedians. Lenny Bruce comes to mind for saying profane things, right? Extra sexual things in that day and age. Wouldn't happen today, right? I think when we talk about sex things, wouldn't happen today. However,
Some comedians are afraid to go on university campuses now, though.
right, you have massive comedians like Jerry Seinfeld. I forget who else, Chris Rock, I think, said they refuse to do those campuses anymore because they're big time comedians and they don't want to get flack or try to be canceled or all this crap. So to me, whenever a culture or or government goes after its comedians, I think we have a problem. I think comedians are like canaries in a coal mine. They go and test out things. They test out ideas. If they're not funny, they're not funny. And then that comedian knows to not tell that joke anymore and try something else. But I admire very much what comedians do. I think it's an extremely difficult job, especially stand up. So anyways, back to today, it has very much shifted onto campuses and academia. And you can see that has absolutely affected policy and has absolutely affected all of culture and all of our world, right? I remember a few years ago, it was like, oh, don't worry, these kids, these students, they're not being raised properly, they're not being taught properly. They're going to learn when they get to the real world. Well, no, what did they do? They demanded that the real world change for them and their new ideas. However, by doing that, they also started making many, many other ideas and types of speech non-acceptable. Right. And that's what you're seeing these days. Now, I just want to end this segment by saying, yes, the Overton window shifts. It's normal. It goes from left to right, up and down, wide and small. However, what becomes very scary and dangerous is when the Overton window is applied inconsistently or differently, depending on your point of view. What has become truly nefarious is that the Overton window is becoming more and more inconsistently applied. So being openly prejudicial has become acceptable depending on what ideology or race you belong to. That's an example. I'll leave it at that.
Right. One example that came to mind while you're discussing that is how we're allowed to portray men today. The Overton window, if you think back to the cheesy action movies of the 80s, like the Terminators, all the Schwarzenegger movies,
Roadhouse.
Roadhouse, like all these movies, you had very, very masculine men in very typically masculine roles. Okay, that is most likely a male fantasy. It's most likely something the lawmen will espouse to. A very, very extreme, obviously, caricature of what a man could be, but it was still acceptable at the time. So acceptable that they could make movies about it. Today, you can't see a commercial, you can't see a movie, you can't see anything where you're going to see a man anywhere remotely in that sort of dominating, masculine, uh,
Robust. Yeah.
aggressive, putting his foot forward sort of role and demeanor. That has fallen outside of the Overton window.
That's toxic, Jason. Toxic.
Well, exactly. Now it has become unacceptable. So it is now outside of what the Overton window is. So if we simply look at the Overton window of what is a man, it has shrank quite a bit.
Who's your epitome of like manliness? Who's like your like man crush that you would say? It doesn't have to be current day, of course.
I actually get called it Swayze and Roadhouse.
Nice. I gotta say, Roadhouse is a very fun movie with a lot of rewatchability.
Yeah, I rewatched it lately. It's one of those it's really hard to get tired of it.
Yeah, I would for myself, I would probably say Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford in the Indiana Jones period,
Hmm.
and that character is just great. Like, you know, no fear, but a bit of humor to it. You know, smart professor, but can do all these rugged, cool, scary things and adventures.
And I think that's what like more complex male roles, if you want to call Indiana Jones and Dalton or whatever his name was from Roadhouse Complex, is they're not a
Yeah,
one trick pony. Yeah, you just said it. Indy, sure he was rugged, sure he was risk taking, but he was also intelligent. He was also witty. He was also calculated. He went through a whole gamut of emotion. Like he felt fear, he felt
yeah, yeah.
anxieties, but he
And he
overcame his
had
opposite.
flaws.
Exactly.
He had flaws. He was pig-headed sometimes. You know, all these things. Yeah,
Same
and
thing
then,
with a guy in Roadhouse. He just wouldn't go around and beat people up. Like he would turn around a club. He would understand the bigger picture. He would tell all the bouncers, "Be nice,"
yeah,
and I'll
be
tell you
nice.
when it's not time to be nice. So there's a certain level of mastery, and complexity, and depth and understanding there, and you just
And
don't
restraint.
restraint exactly. Even
Yeah,
though it ends up in an ass kicking, there's
a
still going to
throat
be
rip.
a throat rip.
Spoiler alert.
I used to fuck guys like you in prison.
That was what an ending to that movie.
Oh man, fun
And
movie.
and at the same time, he does Tai Chi, so he's a really sensitive guy. You know.
Yeah, and he gets the girl. So there you go.
So actually, this is great. Great segue to our new segment, which we're going to try and do every show now, called "Cancelled."
Finish him.
So before we actually go through a few people or things that have been canceled recently, talking within the Overton window theme here, Jason, what do you think will get canceled next?
Well, I'll tell you what, now Roadhouse is getting canceled, so that's unfortunate. I'm going to have to go download it.
Yeah.
But when we were discussing this earlier, the Flintstones is the first thing that came to mind.
Okay.
Very traditional. Now, it's been forever since I watched the Flintstones. I'm a little rusty on this one. But very traditional relationship. She cooked and cleaned. He went to work. Very much, I'm the man, you're the woman, yada, yada.
Right.
I could see that. And I'm sure there's an episode or two in there. You can find something that the
Something
current narrative,
problematic, we say.
something problematic, something that would be worth canceling. So I bet you the Flintstones are somewhere right around the corner.
Okay.
How about you?
Interesting. I'll keep an eye out. I would say I'm going to say Lord of the Rings. You actually mentioned it at the beginning, and that's actually what I was going to say for this segment. Lord of the Rings. I think it's got too many male leads. Yeah, and I think they'll find something racist about the orcs or the Urukai. Yeah,
Yeah. I could see an angle on that.
yeah, something
Although
like that.
they're not portrayed in like anything you could associate to
Other than
race,
orcs, yeah.
but I see what you mean there. Yeah. That's doable.
Whatever they want, right? And they could also say that the all first of all they're called men, of Middle Earth, but that the men are all white. They're too white. So I don't know. That's just what I'm putting my money on. So in terms of recent cancellations, this is we're laughing, but this is pretty sad. Just to name a few, and a lot of you are probably aware, but we have Mr. Potato Head has been Hasbro has decided that they will no longer have a Mr. Potato Head or a Mrs. Potato Head. They will simply have a potato head.
Doesn't that kind of take the fun away from it? Because or else you're just kind of playing with a potato.
I a little bit, I think, but hey, I'm not the genius in marketing at Hasbro. So
Because that kind of introduces another dynamic to it. Because you got the Mister, you got the Mrs. There's some interplay there. But if not, it's just a plastic potato with facial features.
yeah, yeah, and I know it was called like I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a student of history, but I do like that we do keep some traditions intact, And Mr. Potato Head, Mr. Potato Head was the first, and the at least what I remember in the trademark I remember from Toy Story to the actual toy is that he had a mustache, and that was the fun part. It was a potato wearing a mustache. That
Oh
was
man,
the big thing for me.
you just gave me an idea for next week's canceled.
Okay, keep it.
Yeah, I'm going to keep it. Okay, here's another
Sounds
one.
good.
I'm going to toss back to you, but we have it on the list here because you spent a little more time exposed to this person's work than I have. Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, so this was the big topic in the last couple weeks, eh? Dr. Seuss. So it's the Seuss Foundation, I believe their name is. They own the rights. Dr. Seuss has been dead for years. They have decided to cancel 6 of his books. I think as of next year or soon enough, they will stop producing 6 of his books for I guess racist or racially insensitive images. Some portray, I think it's Japanese, and others portray Inuits in a certain way, or there's like Eskimo fish or something like that. This actually saddens me quite a bit. They keep saying we're still going to publish his other books. That's not the point. And again, I always ask, what is the end game, right? If the Overton window keeps shifting one direction, then next year or in 5 years or in 10 years, all of you guys will not see the world the way you saw it 10 years ago or yesterday, right? Therefore, you'll have all of these new books and new things and new concepts to cancel thanks to how you were thinking and how you were indoctrinated today or tomorrow, right? In this hypothetical.
It reminds me a lot of the cancellation of the Four Olds, which was one of the. And again, I'm going to take a bit of an extreme example, but when we did the episode on fallacies, we did say there is a time where the slippery slope fallacy is applicable. And when you look through Mao's Cultural Revolution, one of the big things that he did to get people on board with the changing culture was get rid of the four olds: old ideas, old culture, old habits, old customs. And as benign and trivial or silly as it could be, like to cancel Dr. Seuss, that's part of our old culture. It's part of our old customs. It's part of our old ideas. And it's this slow erosion of all these things that made us us, for better or for worse, but still has part of our culture that we're just steadily getting rid of in the name of progress. But who's
Right.
defining progress?
Right.
And what is progress? And to what goal?
And it's not because you change something or cancel something that you are allowed to just call it progress and then pretend, mask it as something good. it's not how it works. It might work in your head, but I think it's a detriment to society. And just to finish off on Dr. Seuss, Yeah, I grew up reading a lot of Dr. Seuss. I can't think of one iota of what is being talked about in his imaging or wording of the books. I loved those books. I intend on reading them to my kids. I think they're just amazing. They've got great rhymes. They make reading fun, even for kids who don't like reading.
And you bring up the point. We never seem to make the calculation: does the good outweigh the bad?
Yeah,
So let's say that whichever books were canceled, that they do on a few panels portray certain people in a negative light. Okay, let's just give that one completely to that camp.
yeah.
Does the bulk of the work by far outshine that minuscule, what I assume minuscule percentage of the entire body of work, that it's worth not having all the positivity and the light and the joy and the, like you said, the fun with learning for a child because of those few panels?
And the movies and the holiday traditions now with the Grinch and all of this stuff, right? Like it's just the Cat in the Hat, the Lorax, which is like an environmentalist book. Like all of this stuff is just it's absolutely part of our culture, right? The Obamas read those books to their family, and they celebrated Dr. Seuss on his birthday on National Book Day or whatever they call it in the U.S. And what did they do this year? They canceled 6 Dr. Seuss books on that day. So, and that's the question, though. That's the question. If you truly believe in progress, then can you please outweigh the good versus the bad? If you think there has been objectively more good done thanks to this person or that initiative or that project or product, then I think keeping it is called progress.
Yeah, let it be. Yeah, if you get more good than bad out of something, keep doing that.
I think that's kind of the definition, or at least a metric for progress, but I don't know. Maybe I'm not woke enough.
I don't think you are, Will. You're definitely not woke enough.
So just a few other, now we can just a few strong women that were also canceled or attempted to be canceled. You have J.K. Rowling, right? This is not new, but she was an outspoken, more kind of a woke author actually, and quite active on social media, and a proud feminist and that kind of stuff. And then when the trans issues became a lot more vocal and part of, again, policy making and things like that, J.K. Rowling had a problem and spoke up. Basically, I think stating that there's a difference between men and women, or essentially something like that, or stating the biological fact that women are women.
But simply now that is radical in today's Overton window.
At least for some people, but they control a lot of the culture and policy making now, right? And that's what is shrinking the Overton window. Also too fast for people to adjust, which again can be dangerous. But also the Overton window doesn't seem to respect the fact that the majority of folks aren't within that window. And that's, again, another recipe for disaster. So anyways, again, J.K. Rowling, really take away Harry Potter? Like, I'm just saying, what if J.K. Rowling didn't exist? Would you really be better off without Harry Potter and the amazing this amazing world that she brought to, millions of kids. But anyways, she's rich. She owns all rights to everything Harry Potter, so she will not be canceled. And then we'll just finish with Gina Carano, right? That was a big one in the news within the last month. And she was a UFC fighter, and one of the first kind of big women UFC fighter. And then she became an actress, and she was a star on The Mandalorian, which I haven't watched. I've been done with Star Wars since the last.
I remember you and me. We went to go see Ep.8 together in the theater in Camelton, and you'd seen it and I hadn't, and you knew exactly how I was going to react, and you called it, because there was a bunch of times I could just kind of feel you glancing over towards me, and then something would happen, and I would like vocally react involuntarily, completely involuntarily vocally react in the movie theater that had all 6 people in it.
Yeah.
And you're like, yep. See? Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, visually stunning. That's about all I can say.
And the rest is garbage.
Yeah. So anyway, she was picked up by Daily Wire, so conservative American, news and media, and now trying to be more of a cultural outlet. So we shall see.
I can't believe they turned Leia into Mary Poppins. That's not how the Force works.
Yeah, I know. I know. And that whole thing,
amongst many other things.
that whole thing where Luke, meditates with the Force so that he is there as an illusion, not just as an illusion, because he actually doesn't he? Yeah, he actually fights.
No. He's
Kylo
like a
Ren.
hologram. He like projects himself over.
Yeah, but doesn't he actually like? Don't they actually sword fight?
They never make contact because I think at one
Oh,
point Kylo goes and like, wait a minute, you're not really here, and like puts his lightsaber through him real slow, and it's just
okay.
a projection. And then Luke dies because reasons.
Yeah. So that's my thing. I'm like, if you were prepared to die, why didn't you go and actually kill or fight Kylo Ren?
Yeah.
And second of all, that I'm no expert in the Force. Sorry, my religion is not Jedi, but I did not know you could do that.
No, and no, it's not how the Force works. Like, okay, that's one of my nerdy universes that I really enjoy.
Yeah, I think
Manual
that
2, that's not how it works.
I think the Force should respect some sort of Overton window.
Exactly. Well, you think of like good movies that use a magic system or good TV shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender. Okay, they can bend fire and earth and air and water, and it's pretty consistent how they do it through the entire series. They don't just make shit up as they go.
Right.
Anyways, so
Totally.
rant over for that one.
All right, let's bring this home.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so there's something you wrote here that I really like. I just kind of want to give you the floor, and if ever I feel that you need a little primer, I'll shoot something at you. But I like what you got going on here.
All right, so you're gonna let me rant, eh?
You wrote something on you have how people will argue about free speech today, where you have the right to free speech, but you don't have the right from the freedom of the consequences of that speech.
Yeah. So I'll just point out a few, just a few quotes that are stuck in my head that I've heard from people many times when having discussions about cancel culture or free speech or whatever. And those are, quote, "You have a right to free speech, but you have to deal with the consequences," or something of the sort. 2, "You can't tolerate intolerance." And 3, "I believe in free speech, but." Whenever those words are uttered together,
your blood pressure goes up.
Well, just red alarm for anybody who's trying to have a conversation about free speech and truly respects the idea and the concept of free speech, that it makes us all better, freer, and again, at the end of the day, it leads to progress.
So what boils your blood when someone says you have the right to free speech but not the consequences? Like,
well, I just think it's a massive generalization and a complete platitude, right? You could say you have a right to free speech, but you have to deal with the consequences. This could apply to, a girlfriend asking the boyfriend if she looks fat, and he says yes, right? Like, yeah, he has to deal with the consequences of that, right? But it could also apply to the Soviet Union, where you're like, no, I do not want to give you my grain, and then you get tortured and shot.
Right.
Right.
It comes back to the example like we used earlier about COVID. If you're going to say that, yeah, I think lockdowns really wasn't a good idea, and I think we should stop that. Well, what happens if you, or even worse, you walk outside without a mask? Now, I get that's an action, it's not speech, but certainly a statement. Well, you'll get a fine. You might be taken to prison. So you might be espousing a speech, but is it right to have such a dire consequence so vehemently imposed? Now, some people argue yes, some people will argue no.
Exactly. I had a similar conversation about Prof at the University of Ottawa, who, in the context of the actual word, and was apparently using it properly, used the N word for the context of it in the class, right? Was then suspended. I don't know what happened to her afterwards, but she was suspended. It was a whole outrage. Then it became two schools of thought, right? One which was like, yeah, like totally, I respect her right to say it, but she, you have to suffer the consequences. And it's like, well, the consequence is losing your job when you properly use it for historical or contextual, education. I like, again, if you can't predict the outcome, or if the outcome is so insane, then yeah, I think we have a problem. And again, that's why I find that sentence is just a complete platitude. It means nothing. It means nothing except I'm okay. I don't have a problem with what just happened in this context to the person, right?
I find it means that we have a set of rules without saying that we have a set of rules, and anyone who dares abuse those rules will be punished.
Yeah, I had another example. I had a conversation with someone who said, they can. You basically was fighting tooth and nail that someone didn't have the right to, dress up as a Nazi for Halloween, something like that, right? And I was arguing that they should absolutely have the right to do that. And then he finally gave in after our argument and said, "Well, yeah, I guess so, but he'll basically." But people have a right to punch him in the face. And I'm like, okay, so now you're justifying physical violence. And that it never dawned to them that if you allow freedom of speech and freedom of expression, things don't have to lead to physical violence, right? So again, I could have used that there. You have your right to freedom of expression, but deal with the consequences. Bam, punch you in the face.
Also, it really treats people like children. It doesn't believe in the free market. Because if someone dresses as a Nazi for Halloween, it's distasteful at least. So most likely that person is not going to get invited to the after party. Most likely they're not going to bump ahead the line to get to the club. Most likely they're probably not going
to. Unless you're Harry. Wasn't Prince Harry? Didn't Prince Harry dress as a Nazi years ago?
Obviously extremely distasteful, but that was like a teenager lashing out, right? So whatever. Okay, I get it. Dumb move, but you do you, kid. But essentially when someone says, okay, you should be able to dress as a Nazi, but I have the right to punch you, that means they don't believe that enough people are going to look at this guy and be like, come on, man. Just go get changed. Put something else on.
Right. And no one had to get punched in the face.
Exactly. So that's what I mean. And a lot of the policy today seems to be very much hand-holding and very babying, where and without saying it, that's basically what you're telling people is, we don't trust you to make the right decision, and we don't trust you to police yourselves well enough. So we're going to put you in a box, at least an ideological box.
Yeah. So just to finish off here, I want to make the point for those who are also fine or even happy with countless people, companies, and organizations getting kicked off of social media or even prevented to use servers. So Parler was an example. They were kicked off of the Amazon servers, therefore they couldn't exist, right? They couldn't be part of the internet for a while. So to those who argue that their freedom of speech was never impeded and that all of these social media and tech companies are private businesses and allowed to do whatever they want, my question is, should they though? If Amazon owns most of the servers and owns over 80% of the book market, this is just an example, they own over 80% of the book market right now, should they actually be allowed to disappear books and ideas that we don't agree with, or that they don't agree with specifically? Should they be allowed to prevent other companies from sharing their products and ideas by removing their ability to live on the web? To me, I think that's pretty scary, and I don't know if we've seen anything like this before.
I think that espouses a lot of different things. First thing that made me think was Spider-Man. Great power comes with great responsibility. If Amazon is to have such a massive market share, then they very much do have the responsibility to be even freer and to share even more. If they choose to not have that and to not be free, then there should be absolutely no restriction on anyone else, because then people will eventually find ways like, okay, where can I get this book? Oh, not on Amazon. Oh, I can get it over here. I'm going to get it over here.
Right. And for those who talk about this, so I've heard this argument made recently. So for those who talk about how the First Amendment or free speech in general simply applies in the town square, right? So all these people who hate the Constitution and all this stuff, then all of a sudden, when the right people in their minds are censored or deplatformed, they're fine with applying the exact rules of the First Amendment or of free speech here in Canada.
So you see that all the time, the deplatforming of Trump.
Right.
That was a very obvious one.
Yeah. But I just want to make the two arguments here, 2 points to that statement, is that I would absolutely make the argument that the town square is no longer a physical location. but rather the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world. And two, when people are prohibited from gathering in the town square due to COVID, and if they do gather, they will get arrested. How is that considered your medium of free speech today? Right. You're not allowed to gather outside. If you do, you go to jail or get a fine. And the vast majority of information is now done on these massive tech company platforms. And you're going to tell me that still we do town square. And I'm like, well, what if I can't leave my house?
And also that these tech companies do have a very obvious bias, whether they acknowledge it or not.
Absolutely. And they have a monopoly. So
right. So right there, you have a slanted town square.
Yeah. So anyways, just to sum it up, guys, whenever there's a shift in cultural and political power, the Overton window tends to shift also. Back in the early part of the 20th century, you were ostracized should you oppose World War I, even World War II in America. In the 1940s and 50s, speech involving communism was seriously monitored and in some cases punished. And in the 60s, certain comedians were arrested. I mentioned Lenny Bruce a while ago for telling profane jokes. Now, the culture in most institutions have shifted dramatically to the left. Words, expressions, or ideas which were commonsensical just mere years ago are now considered highly offensive, fireable, or in some cases worth jail sentences. And no, I'm not exaggerating at all. The UK is a great example. They've had a massive amounts of thought or hate crimes. Are the title of the name of our podcast is not it's not a coincidence. Thought crimes for a reason. We want to be able to have open discussions about these things. So Count Dankula comes to mind. He was a big case in the UK. Jason knows the case. He tried to piss off his girlfriend as a YouTube joke. He pretended that he trained his dog to worship Hitler, right? So he would heil to Hitler and all these things, basically while Nazi propaganda was playing in the background.
And all the little pug would do is just lift up his little paw, right?
Right, exactly. All just made up, but just as a joke against his girlfriend, right? Turn his pug evil. And he was thrown in jail. Anyways, think about it, guys. So we now have governments such as the one in the US, which is now going after its own people for questioning an election. While the same government and the mainstream media for the past 4 years accused the past government and specifically the president of the United States of being a Russian asset. But now they're going after private citizens for having questions about, voter fraud, mail-in voting, all sorts of things. So last thing I'll say, it's important for anyone who may be okay with this censoring or presume that they're proponents of free speech, the I love free speech, but, or I'm for free speech, but it's important for them to realize that the Overton window and your acceptable ideas are only acceptable while your team, your culture, your government is in power. And in most cases throughout history, this window has shifted, and the speech and idea policing was used in catastrophic and brutal ways on its own citizens. Like, do I have to go through examples? The Soviet Union, Maoist China, Cambodia, Pinochet in Chile. Like, these are all examples, and they went after thinkers first. They went after people who were politically different, who were outside of their Overton window. Just think about it. We're living in the most amazing time in human history. So please, let's not spoil what has taken thousands of years to refine. And it doesn't mean that there's still not work to do. There's always progress to make, always work to do. But the solution is never, ever restricting ideas of speech, especially against private citizens. Because one day, they'll come after you too. If you support a government that is able to do it to one portion of its citizens, then maybe one day that government will be those citizens' government, and they'll do the exact same thing to you.
Buddy, I don't think there's a better place to end than that.
All right. Well, thanks for joining, guys. That was the Overton window.
Stay free.
Stay free, my friends. You can find us on locals.com. Thought Crimes Podcast is our name. You can also find us wherever you can find podcasts, so Apple Podcasts and Spotify are the big ones. So thanks a lot, guys. Cheers.